Hey guys, what is up? It's the pre-roll with Joe. I just wanted to come on and apologize if we sound down or extra drunk and exhausted this episode. I'm sure we explained it at the beginning, but we essentially recorded this review twice in a row because of technical difficulties or malfunction. If you know us, you know that we do block recording, which means we record multiple episodes a night, and we had been going since like 3 or 4 p.m., and by the second time we recorded this episode, it was like 1 a.m. So yeah, I just didn't know if we were awake or sober enough to properly explain that during this episode, but hey, I still think it's a good review. Besides that, just the usual reminders. Join How Many Fingers Am I Holding Up, the Facebook group on Facebook if you haven't already. I feel like I'm accepting new people into the group every day, and that's super exciting. So come and join the multiple movie conversations we're having right now. And again, the biggest way that you can support the podcast right now is by buying merch at howmanyfingerspodcast.bigcartel.com. I've said it before, but we have t-shirts, stickers, and koozies. Check it out. Also, check out our upcoming reviews. Next week we have A Quiet Place. We're reviewing A Quiet Place with Emily and Cam Marziani of This Old Married Couple podcast, and then the week after that we'll be reviewing Isle of Dogs with Peter Granada, aka DJ Pete. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into this week's review of Ready Player One. Take it away, exhausted Mike and Joe recording these intros at 2 a.m. Hi, I'm Joe.
And I'm Mike.
And you're listening to How Many Fingers Am I Holding Up? The podcast. And this week we'll be reviewing Ready Player One.
You get it? It's video games.
Hey everyone, and welcome to How Many Fingers Am I Holding Up, featuring two guys getting bronied and reviewing movies in a weekly podcast form.
And thank you to my beautiful girlfriend, Rowan Court, on Facebook for that synonym suggestion. Oh, boy.
Mike, do you want to explain what the context of this episode is?
So if we seem really angry and tense for however long this review goes on for, it's because we recorded an hour of this review already, and I looked down and I realized that there's not even an error message. There's no GarageBand app open, even though I know for a fact, despite this being the third episode and no one's going to believe me because of it, I know for a fact that I opened up the GarageBand app, because we even had a discussion before we recorded about where I was like, oh, we just narrowly avoided disaster because I had the wrong inputs. Mm-hmm. Like I had it on like an input that a mic's not plugged into. And I was like, oh, we narrowly avoided that. And then I fixed that. And I know I hit record because I always hit record at the same time that I do the audio, the video thing.
Right.
And the video was definitely going because the video stopped at one point while we were recording. Mm-hmm. Either way, at some point the GarageBand crashed without an error message.
Right.
So we recorded a whole hour not knowing that it wasn't there. Because like the first thing that we're doing in the GarageBand file is recording the audio, I don't like save it before then. So it was an unsaved file. So it had nowhere to put, when it crashed, it had nowhere to put like the half finished file. So it's just gone. So we just lost an hour of recording this podcast, and It's just dumb because it's for no reason.
I'm sorry.
It was like the third episode. We were like like 10 minutes away from like finishing the episode and going to bed.
Yeah.
Now we have to come back and review this shitty fucking movie again. So
Spoiler alert!
If this is an angry, short, abridged review, that's why. There's a better version of this review out there somewhere. But
in the Oasis.
God had other plans. There's an empty Miller High Life here too.
Oh,
there were more.
There were like 3 or 4 empty Miller High Lifes, but this week
is like a third episode.
This week,
maybe you guys will benefit from that.
Yeah, we might just be a little more drunk. I know I am.
Yeah, we're drinking Miller High Life.
This week we're drinking Miller High Life.
Many Miller High Lifes.
Yeah,
even if we're not living the high life right now.
We aren't. This is a beer that I've had like a 12-pack of that I had some of earlier, so I bought another 12-pack, and now it's just completely gone. So that will give you an idea of...
That's where we are in the podcast.
That's tonight. Where we are in the podcast. And I mean, honestly, if I had to give... It tastes terrible. Like, what's the difference between Miller Lite and Miller High Life? There's no High Life being
more
lived.
champagne-y.
It's the champagne of beers, but honestly, I'd rather have Miller
Lite.
Miller Lite. Yeah. So that's what you're going to get on maybe your second or third try of How Many Fingers episode. You're going to get a fucking hard edge opinion.
You're going to get people who are going to get right to the point because they've had this discussion very recently.
I mean, we didn't even talk about how bad Miller Lite was in the first or second round of this episode. It's just now we're like, no, fucking give me something else. But honestly, it was $9.50 for a 12-pack. So
not too bad.
That is why you're seeing Miller High Life. Mike, would you like to give me the IMDb description once more?
I've already done that.
Ready Player One.
How many times do you need me to read this for you, Joe?
I love to alienate our audience, too.
Who are not in on this joke. When the creator of a virtual reality world called The Oasis dies, he releases a video in which he challenges all Oasis users to find his Easter egg, which will give the finder his fortune.
Very good.
Grant, award, maybe better words than give.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm gonna stop referencing these previous episodes that you guys will just never hear because
I'm still mad.
They're lost in cyberspace or what have you. But Ready Player One was directed by Steven Spielberg. I'm not gonna go through his whole movie list. Just because, again, literally, we discovered a month ago, we have reviewed The Post. And then in The Post, we referenced, hey, I'm not going to, list all of the movies Steven Spielberg's have done. Steven Spielberg's.
All the Spielbergs. All the Steven Spielbergs.
The plural amount of Steven Spielbergs. Because we did Bridge of Spies when that came out. And we did a pretty extensive review of the films that he did in that. So Ready Player One was directed by Steven Spielberg. If you really want to know what films he directed, again, go to Bridge of Spies. But the screenplay was by Zach Penn and Ernest Cline. It was based on Ready Player One, the novel by Ernest Cline. I really doubt Ernest Cline had that much to do with the screenplay. Zach Penn, I know he did, what's it called? He did a lot of oh gosh. Sorry, I'm just like looking now at what he did. He was like the co-screenwriter for like X-Men: The Last Stand, The Incredible Hulk, The Avengers, Atari, Game Over, Charlie's Angels, Ants, Men in Black, Last Action Hero. So he's had quite the array of writing credits.
Why are you doing that?
Why you gotta be like that?
Get a chance to see what the error message was?
I did not get a chance.
Keep going.
All right,
and we're back. The gods apparently do not want our Ready Player One review to come out, but we will not be stopped. The camera died, and then immediately after, when I got up to turn the camera back on, I apparently unplugged the GarageBand MIDI interface again. But we're back. We're rolling. We're going to keep powering through this. Joe, you were just most recently talking about Zach Penn for the second time tonight.
I don't even know. Let's just restart the episode.
I don't want to restart the episode.
Okay. All right.
I don't think there's too much more to your Joe notes, if I remember from the first time.
All right. So, yeah.
That was Zach Penn. I think we just jumped into the movie from there.
Okay. Yeah. So it's been a long night, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, so from what I understand from the book Ready Player One, I mean, again, like I've talked about, like it like maybe 5 years, like half a decade ago, I heard a lot of really great, positive kind of things about it. It was a great read. It was a great novel kind of thing. And then kind of between that point and leading up to this movie, I've heard that it's not great and that it's kind of everything wrong with fandom. I've also heard that the book is, obsessed with everything 80s pop culture, and the movie is kind of more so obsessed with pop culture in general.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this movie kind of reminds me of like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Wreck-It Ralph, the Lego movie, especially the Lego Batman movie, just the way that it references, really. Yeah. Have you heard anything? This review is so fucked.
I'm sorry. Have I heard what?
Oh boy. Just have you had any experience with the novel before this film at all?
I never heard of anyone directly being like, "Oh, I read the novel and liked it or didn't like it." I feel like it was starting to get into, like, in the zeitgeist is too strong of a term, but it was out there. Like I was hearing, like I had heard of the novel before, just in like very vague, general, ethereal, peripheral edges of references. Like
I'm like drunk now, but I mean we've been through a 12-pack or two now of Miller High Life.
We're living the high life
of High Life, and this bullshit is a young adult novel. I'm sorry, it's a YA novel.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, let's talk about this main character. He's I think I was referencing Red Letter Media. He's a fucking Mary Sue.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you watched The Force Awakens and if you had any sort of Mary Sue complaints, my God, watch this movie. There's really nothing remarkable about him besides that he's just a straight white male, and that's kind of all he shares with this Willy Wonka character at all. He's just the straight white male who's kind of like, yeah, I don't know, I kind of like the Oasis, and I research shit. Like, he's not a part of the resistance at all. He's just kind of like, oh, you know, I just kind of fuck around on
his only Oasis. Real sort of like thing that puts him on the fringe at all is being like a lower class citizen,
right?
But like, he lives in like the most heavily populated area, so it's not even like a minority at that point. That's, you know, clearly the majority live in the stacks because of the population problem going on here. But yeah, like this was something that we sort of belabored in the first take of this episode, but just like it's a bad time to put out a movie to have that has like a really boring like white male character, you know, like it's just the culture and the climate is not really right for
almost
that. Like if you're gonna, you know, tell a story through the lens or, you know, through the eyes of a white male character, then like have something really important to say, or at least slightly important to say. And this movie has nothing important to say at all, much less anything even like interesting. You know, like there's nothing about him that's like that couldn't have been, you know, gender bent or race bent in some way when making this movie. And like especially like when it's a story like in the novel and in this movie that is about like, you know, like they spend so much time on like in the Oasis, like you can be whoever you want to be, you know, you can be a different gender, you can be a different sexuality, you can be a different, you know, race or species, or like you can change whatever you want about your online appearance through your avatar to represent.
Even a fat woman can be attractive.
You can represent like what you feel on the inside outwardly in this digital world, at least. And to have a movie like that where it's like someone who like is, you know, white, so privileged in that way, male, so privileged in that way, and like, yeah, he's lower class, but so is everyone else in the stacks. So it's just kind of like what is he really escaping from in the Oasis? And like I understand there's stuff with like, you know, his parents are dead, but we don't go into that. There's stuff with like, you know, his aunt and like the crappy men that like she sleeps with and brings back to the trailer. But like, A, he's never at the trailer. He's always in the Oasis part, like actually escaping. And like, B, again, we don't really go into that like in this movie. So there's nothing about him that's interesting. There's nothing about him that really fits the mold of like what this movie wants to be about and should be about, which is about like the actual escape of the Oasis. And like they explore that in other characters, like they explore that with the H character very slightly and very like you know, they don't spend a whole lot of time on it like they maybe could have with a main character, but like the H character who like we're led to believe, it's not really a spoiler, but like for most of the movie we believe that it's a dude best friend, even though it's like really horrible like voice masking where it's like dude clearly not like a natural sounding voice. And plus the girl Lena Waithe is in a lot of like the press tours for this movie, so you're like, oh well, I recognize that voice even through the voice masking. That's her. But she is like a black woman, but in her avatar she's like this, I mean, a different species, but also a different gender. And like, that's something that's more like akin to what this movie could be and should be about, rather than like, oh, like I'm a white male from like a privileged, you know, race and gender, but I'm just going to like make my character have like slightly cooler hair and stuff. Like,
right.
Like,
yeah.
What is the Oasis really doing for you to escape, you know, in that scenario?
Yeah. And I mean, I think I said previously that I would complain about, you know, Wade Watts, the protagonist, you know, his supporting characters are all female and people of color, kind of just these sidekick characters, and how they're not developed at all. But honestly, this movie doesn't even spare like Wade Watts. Like he's not even developed at all.
Yeah, Yeah, like
it's real.
There could have been something where like even if you are going to like make the choice to stick with like a white male character in this,
it's just kind of like
bad choice in
I'm
this
a
climate,
nerd,
but like
you're a nerd, let's go.
But they don't like actually make him a nerd. Like he's confident in this movie. Like just the way he like walks or like slides down, you know, like the ropes as he's like walking down the fire escapes to get to like the ground level of the stacks. Like there's nothing about his body language that says like, oh, like I'm uncomfortable in the real world.
Yeah.
He can like talk to people in the real world with no problems. He's not like stuttering. He's not like, you know, having trouble finding the words. He's like, not that he's like incredibly good looking or incredibly well dressed, but he's not on like the negative scale of things in those regards either. And like, there's nothing like, we don't see him like going to school and like getting bullied or like getting picked last for like the football team or something like that. Like, there's nothing about his life that besides like his, you know, his economic disparity, which again, everyone else in that scenario is dealing with. So we didn't need like some boring ass white male dude in this role. It could have been anyone else from the stacks that could have been the main character here. Like, there's just nothing about him that says like, oh, the Oasis gives me something that I don't get from the real world.
Yeah.
Besides the economic disparity. But again, they don't go into that in this movie because this movie is just so concerned with like, what if there was this really cool like digital world we could go into when like we open with like, oh, we're living in fucking like RV like trailers that are like stacked on top of each other because overpopulation and economic disparity has gotten so bad that like, you know, companies like IOI can pay their employees like millions of dollars like just to work for them. But the rest of us are living in fucking like RV like pop-up trailers like in stacks. Like, and we don't go into like how did the world get like that? Like, I mean, we can follow the thread from where we are now, but like that doesn't mean you don't have to say it or express that in the movie.
Right. And yeah, that's just an assumption. I mean, like I was saying before, this movie has some of the worst world building I've ever seen in a movie. I mean, we start in the stacks where it's kind of like, oh, holy shit! Like, the stacks look like the mega city or whatever the fuck it was called in like Club Dread. Like, it looks really bad. Like, I mean, I guess this is why we're all in the Oasis. And later in this film, we kind of discover like, oh no, this is just like the fucking poor part of town. Like there's other parts of the town where there's like a fucking metropolis. Like it's just like nobody did like the fucking real world building where I think even in the movie or even in the novel, it's kind of like the more Asian characters like actually like, oh, they live in Japan and there's kind of like this kind of sense of world or whatever, but instead it's kind of like, oh no, we all live in a 20-mile radius and like this is
right around the corner.
Oh, hold on, Artemis, I'm gonna drive to you. It's so unlike the internet. I mean, we talked about this before. It kind of feels like Steven Spielberg played like, you know, like, oh, Halo 2, and was like, okay, I understand how the internet and gaming works. Yeah, let's 4v4 this. It's just such a goofy fucking premise for like a fucking 70-year-old director to do who has real no understanding of like, again, like you were saying, like, oh, like, how does Fortnite work? How does PUBG work? How does like anything work that like if you were in a lobby of one of these popular games, like it doesn't sound anything
like in
like
this movie,
yeah.
like everyone's just kind of like walking and like just kind of like walking like they would in like the real world. Like I'm gonna go do these errands at the library or the curator or whatever I do in this. We're like in like the real world, quote unquote, like lobbies of real massive multiplayer online games or just multiplayer games in general, like the tower in Destiny, like the characters would just like kind of like form a circle and we would all be like crouching just because it was fucking goofy and it was like something to do and it was like that was your way of connecting to other people. Or like you have like the lobbies in like PUBG where like people are like creating like human centipedes or just shouting like random obscenities just because they can, and like no one knows who they are. There's a certain anonymity to it and no one's going to judge them for like shouting the N-word because they don't know who to like attribute those atrocities to. And like that's sort of like what people do when they're left to their own devices in an online realm. And someone who hasn't played those types of games doesn't understand that, so they come up with this like, oh, well, what if we had this like beautiful like oasis that everyone could go do whatever they wanted to and everyone would just like be happy and it would be this like glorious thing. But like, god damn, like imagine like the customer service for the oasis of like people being like, oh yeah, this person like hacked my shit and like ruined my life, or like this is my only escape, and someone like fucking was calling me racial slurs online or teabagging me or whatever horrible shit that people actually do in like real online multiplayer games.
It's like Steven Spielberg doesn't know what 4chan is. You know, it's like he doesn't give a fuck or know what the actual kind of I don't know. It's just like he doesn't fucking know. It's just kind of like
it's just weird that like a movie that's so about like Easter eggs, which we'll certainly get into later, like couldn't just throw some Easter eggs to like gaming culture in terms of like a little like a teabagging thing would have gone like really far in this like
definitely
movie,
yeah,
or just like any kind of semblance of understanding about like online lobbies, like what they're actually like.
Or this film had nothing to say about like how we use avatars, you know, like just as simple as that. Like any message about technology is. Any technology, any message that they had to say about technology was just incredibly simplistic and just moralizing. Like, it was just very black and white. It was very, like, wrong and right. It was just kind of like, whoa, like, Parsifal's the good guy, and, you know, whoever's the bad guy, so... Like, the internet has brought such, like, a gray area.
Big moral message was, like, 2 days a week, you should stop playing video games.
That was the worst part. We spend this entire movie in this... Again.
And they're, like, singing the praises of the Oasis the entire time.
Self-described Oasis. And then the moral of the story is like Daddy Spielberg being like, hey, maybe you kids shouldn't spend so much on your cell phones, and maybe you should look around outside. This is Big Daddy Spielberg. Just like, don't spend so much time on the Instagram and maybe sniff a flower every once in a while, huh? Like, it was so fucking terrible that I couldn't even take it seriously by the end. I was just, hey, don't, like, there's real people out there, not just the digital. It was self-contradicting in so many ways.
Because the movie also, like, glorifies the Holiday character.
Yeah.
And like I guess it does sort of the only like length it's willing to go to sort of show some flaws in his part is like, oh, he couldn't really socialize well, and like he didn't like take risks when it came to like fucking his best friend's girlfriend.
My God, this movie's a fucking mess. It's like also, like...
If I hadn't played so many video games, I could have fucked my best friend's wife.
Jesus Christ.
I know in the movie the timeline works out where that's beforehand, but it's a weird, like, regret to take place. It's weird that character...
Yeah, I'll
moral character
later.
is just watching that all unfold and, like...
fucking
you put that in the fucking game.
It's fucking stupid and fucking insane, This movie's logic is fucking out of control. I mean, again,
but like
Steven Spielberg directed it, and like I love some of these set pieces, and nobody knows how to direct like, you know, some great set pieces like Steven Spielberg. But like again, like we were previously discussing, like nobody's life was ever in danger. Like the stakes were so superficial, and it was just kind of like,
you might lose all this coin.
right? Like we might zero out. Like and again, like they tried to be like, what if in Japan there's a woman who wants to jump out a window because like it was just so.
They should have.
They
I don't want to. Let's come
thro-
back to the Avatar point because I don't want to lose that.
Well,
But
they
should
they
have.
had a throwaway line where it was kind of like, oh, like one of these random guys that his aunt sleeps with is like, oh, I spent the whole mortgage on that.
Yeah. But that was also like trying to play into like, oh, people play video games too much. They spend too much money on video games. They should have brought in the whole like loyalty centers thing earlier and explained it better. It was something that we talked about with in terms of like the world building is so poor in this movie, and like
It's terrible.
like the loyalty centers. I still don't fully understand them because like, are these people just doing like really? I apologize if we talked about this in this episode already because we're recording this for the second time. I'm trying to remember what we've talked about so far now and what we talked about last time.
Right.
But the loyalty centers, like they just have people that are working off like thousands of dollars of debt by like just doing like menial tasks in the Oasis. But it's like they're also paying other people. Like it might just be Parzival that he offers millions of dollars in the contract for. Right. Presumably the other people are pretty well paid if they have that kind of like coin to like throw out there. And if they're working on this like pretty big project, you know, they can like hire like, you know, dozens of people to just like research like stuff about this project that's like not actually making them any money. It's just something that they're like putting into like, because we could maybe own the Oasis and that would be a big thing.
Right.
But there's no actual immediate return. And they've been pouring money into it for like 4 fucking years. So clearly they make a lot of money, but they also just like have people that like work off like $30,000 of like debt just by like doing stupid tasks in like the Oasis, which like, again, they have all these other people that are working for them that they're clearly paying a decent amount of money for. Like those people can't like place a few charges on that like small bridge. Like they need to have like an army of people with like student debt in the Oasis to like.
That's fucking stupid.
But like that was a sort of like when they brought that in terms of like when they have the one scene at like the dance club, which there's so many things that I want to riff on this movie, in terms of like when they're in the dance club and the people just like walk in with like guns and start shooting them. Where like, what is the logic of the Oasis? Like, are guns
I don't know.
used everywhere? Because like when they're in the library, the curator's like no weapons or whatever allowed. So I sort of assumed that was the deal with like other community places. Because again, if not, Steven Spielberg clearly hasn't played massive multiplayer online games where like if weapons are allowed in these other places, like goddamn, like play GTA Online. Like I can't walk like down the street without someone just rolling up on a bike with their squad and like killing me and then staying near my body until I respawn and killing me again and then killing me again and then killing me again. But like that doesn't exist in like this like Oasis world. But yet these people can just like come in the Oasis with their like whatever and start like firing guns at them.
It's so like non-logical. It's kind of like Steven Spielberg doesn't know what like Club Penguin is. Like you know, it's just
like
it's
if the
just
Oasis
like,
is that important to everyone where like people are mortgaging their house on it, then like you don't think there would be people that would be like, fuck the social norms of like you shouldn't fire a gun in a digital dance club. I'm gonna fire a gun in a digital dance club and steal all the coins of everyone who's dancing here because they're gonna zero out and you can apparently collect their coins when they die. Like everyone would be doing that in the Oasis if that was the thing.
It's a get rich quick scheme.
Yeah, that's what he does in the race. Is just like, oh, I'm going to go towards the back so I can catch all the bouncing coins when people die in the race. Right, anyway, the point I was trying to make was that like one of the sort of nicer moments of this movie, but it comes a little too late, and they should have brought it in earlier to give some more stakes to this movie, is when in that dance club scene when it like all goes south or whatever, and she kind of gets angry at him, and she's like, this isn't just like a game to me. This isn't just whatever. Like, you know, my father was stuck in those loyalty centers And this is like, my way of essentially trying to like free him from that. And like, we can't, it's life or death if IOI gets control of like the Oasis.
Right,
Like people are going to die because of that. Like this movie desperately needed those stakes before that. Because before that, it was just kind of like, oh, I live in the stacks, and even though I have this super expensive video game system where I can escape and I don't really have to deal with the horrible reality of the stacks, I want like a better life. Like either show life being really horrible on the stacks, like leaking through into his digital gaming experience, and his poverty affecting his gaming experience where he can't even escape fully, or have some sort of other real world consequences like this girl has that sort of bleed through, where it's like, I wish I could just play the Oasis to escape, but I'm here to like make sure that IOI doesn't control it and more people don't die in loyalty centers, which like explain the loyalty centers earlier and then introduce that concept earlier, so that when we're watching these action sequences, we're not just like, oh, I hope he doesn't lose all of his coins.
Yeah. And have we talked in this episode, and not the false recorded episodes, about, did I follow up on like the kind of like Red Letter Media thing where it was just kind of like Ty Sheridan has like this, like he also played like Cyclops in the newer X-Men movies,
this episode,
where he kind of has like this very pronounced jawline, and he has these kind of gigantic lips, and he has this very kind of like attractive nose, where it's kind of like, oh yeah, like he looks great in like the X-Men movies where he kind of has this visor and he's Cyclops and he's shooting out of it. And then also in this, where like a majority of this film he's kind of spent with like this visor on or whatever.
Models,
and again, when he takes that off, it's just kind of this less significant character. But just, I thought that was goofy, and that's funny, and that's, what Red Letter Media is talking about. Again, I talked about this, Red Letter Media's review of this is kind of dumb. They have Mike, and they don't have Jay, and they have, what's his name in it?
Is Rich the other one? Is that what his name is?
I think so. He's got a very distinct laugh, and I think he's, like, particularly funny, and I think he's, like, really great in some like Star Wars reviews. He has some like really funny things, but in this review in particular, he's like, I think they like copied off of Danny Phantom, like, which is a Nickelodeon series that came out like way after the book, kind of, and it's just stupid. But yeah, let's talk more about this movie, because I think it's problematic, because it has a fucking competitive sense of fandom. Like, there's just this like one right way to be a fan, and again, in this Willy Wonka-esque competition where, we talked about this before, where like the trailer is like, it's really dragging that fucking Willy Wonka theme throughout this, where it's like, oh man, we gotta find this like one guy who's true of heart, and he's just really got the right set of priorities. Like all of that, but you also have to have this like
Willy Wonka wasn't making people jerk off to his like home video.
Oh no, exactly. You really gotta get this like fucking fetishistic like attention to Holiday's life, like like he's like, I want to find somebody who is like the same way. Like I just want to find somebody who values the same way like I do, and who sets out to learn everything I learned, but through the same way that I think it, and that I like, think about it. Like, it's this like weird contradiction of, I don't know. It's just like, whoever's the biggest fan of me wins. Like, it's this contradiction within itself. And I guess that has to reflect back onto the novel. It leans into like this kind of, like we were saying before, it's kind of like, there's one right way to be a fan. And, like, Holiday and Wade are kind of like both of these like straight white males, and it's kind of like there's one right way to be a fan, kind of. I mean, we talked about this before, but it was kind of like, I'm sorry guys, I'm gonna stop referring to it as that. But there's one part where Artemis says like, oh hey, Parzival, like meet me in this like dance club, kind of. We'll talk about this tonight, kind of. And Parzival or Wade has like this whole big scene where he's talking to I forget
H.
Oh yeah, H. And he's kind of like, oh, like what should I wear, kind of. And he's like Purple Rain or like, Buckaroo Bonds or like Buckaroo Banzai. And like he goes into like this thing where he's kind of like, like we'll see if she gets it. And I thought that was like real fucking gross. And it was just like, it was real fucking like, man, like like it was what were you gonna say?
Just there's a few instances that like really approach fandom and like Easter eggs and getting references in like a really gross way in this movie that like really turned me off. And like the first of which is like meant to like villainize the Nolan Sorrento character when like he invites or brings what's his face, Wade, to his like office via hologram, and he's trying to like seem like a cool guy so that he can like be like, oh, you can come work for me, and like, oh, like I wouldn't be so bad if I like ruled the Oasis, so just like tell me the keys and I'll give you all this money and whatnot. But like he's got like these people like in his ear that are feeding him references, and he's like, saying like, oh, like this cool song and this like whatever, and just like the implication is supposed to be that he's a fake fan, and that's like really lame, that he doesn't understand like these everyday man references, and like what Wade calls him is like a hater, like later in that, like what's the line that you were quoting?
A fanboy can always tell a hater, which is such a manufactured line for like anybody who's like, I don't know about this movie, kind of, like it's just weird. And just like
it's a weird thing to villainize someone through. Like it doesn't make me hate him more, and it just says more about like Wade, that he would be like, oh, you don't know those actual fucking references. Like he's a fucking CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I don't give a fuck what he watches when he comes home.
It was just like this.
Like that's not the problem. The problem is that he's having people work their asses off in loyalty centers. Like not that he doesn't know like Aha by or Take Me On by Aha. Like,
and like I was saying before, there's a really great article by Constance Grady at Vox.com, and it's titled "The Ready Player One Backlash Explained," and it kind of goes into like, if this movie came out 5 years earlier, like Mike and I would have like be having like this very different conversation, but we're living in this post Gamergate world where there's been a lot of like gatekeeping with who's like, I'm a true nerd, kind of, and like, like I'm a true video gamer. Like we didn't have like the fake nerd girl meme,
gamer girl.
Like 5 years ago, kind of. It's one of those things where it's kind of like this book has aged very, very poorly. And it's kind of like they obviously already bought the rights to it, and they're like, fuck it, like let's just like do it. And it's just like this movie was a poor choice.
The other really gross instance of like actually like punishing someone for not understanding references is when they, for like the second key or something, they end up going to like the Shining level or house or whatever it is. Which, like, we talked about this at length the first pass through, but it's just like, it's for a movie that is like really marketed to like the younger generation, or at least it seems like it should be marketable to the younger generation. they spend so much time on like references that like 13-year-old kids are not gonna get. Like, like I didn't watch The Shining until I was like 19 or 20, like
in
if
college,
that, like,
right, yeah.
you know, and even then it was kind of like, you know, maybe I had watched it too late by then. But like, you know, kids that are gonna be 13 in 2018. Like, you know, are their parents going to be telling them, like, oh, you got to watch the fucking, like, Shining?
Yeah, you're going to be a fucking loser.
It's just like, they could have picked a movie that, like, maybe wasn't, like, an, you know, an R-rated movie that kids, like, maybe might not be watching because of how scary it is, you know? There's a more popular, more modern reference, I feel like, that could have been made there, you know? Like, even, like, The Exorcist or something like that would have, like, been more in, like, the zeitgeist as opposed to some of the stuff from The Shining.
It was also, like, The Shining, I was excited and kind of like taken aback by
I did like it, but I just felt like it was a bad choice.
I was just kind of like, whoa, shit, like, oh my god, like these characters are walking into the Overlook Hotel. And it looks like it's actually like film, like the grain is perfect. Like the way that they walk in, it looks like it's fucking filmed like when The Shining was filmed. Like it's crazy. Like it's wild for like somebody who really appreciates film, kind of. And I know like Kubrick and Spielberg were good friends. I think Kubrick was actually supposed to direct AI.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I think he started it and Spielberg took over.
Spielberg took over it, yeah, after he died. So, like, I know they were friends, but it kind of felt disrespectful after a while to have all these fucking dumb avatars like running around in one of the best movies ever made, like one of the best horror movies ever made, and also it doesn't ever amount to anything. Like
the actual key to the key is not in the Shining part of the level,
right? They really don't even go into any of the themes of The Shining. It's just kind of this head fake of just kind of like, hey, we're in the fucking Shining, this is crazy, like, aren't you a nerd or not, bro? Like, kind of.
I feel like they also don't even really go into like the really creepy parts of The Shining, even though they're talking about like how scary this whole is, but like they show like the most, I mean, again, part of it is because it is in a movie that is for kids, but like that should be a tell of like, maybe we shouldn't do something about The Shining in this movie. Like if you can't show like the bear scene, then like I feel like you're not really getting into The Shining.
I mean,
they do show the bathtub scene, but it doesn't really have the same effect because you're not seeing like the nudity of it.
I mean,
which is like, that's a real shock in The Shining when you're like, oh, here's this like naked girl, and then she's
you see, I mean, you see the naked woman turn into a fucking like dead corpse in this movie, and I thought that was some sort of leap for like what is basically a children's movie. But I mean,
it's like you can't get into what makes The Shining scary in 5 minutes because
most definitely
the transformation of the Jack Nicholson character is obviously the most scary part of like, oh, here's our dad and now he's coming after us with an axe.
Oh no, most definitely, and it's just kind of like it's so obviously a ploy because they never address any of the themes of The Shining, and then like also it has nothing to fucking do with The Shining because it ends in a zombie dance number,
which is like an Easter egg that isn't even a real Easter egg because it's like his first game that he designed that he like hated, which like we're not like, how are we supposed to know that? You couldn't put like an actual Easter egg to something in there. Like I thought there was going to be something cool about The Shining, like even if it was something as cliche as like what's the room number in The Shining that everyone, is it the room they go into, 437 or
right yeah, but it's also like I was saying before, like the central mystery is like, how does he get the keys, you know? Like this doesn't, like this, the part of how he gets like the bronze, silver, and gold keys does not work at all. Ideally, we would have this kind of like Ready Player One movie that slowly releases the details of Holiday's life. And as a viewer, we can kind of like follow along, and we can kind of piece together these details of kind of like, oh, I know how like he's, Parzival's gonna solve this. But instead, like, that's not
we find them out when he's explaining, like, oh, here's how I found out where the key was.
Yeah, that's not what happens at all. The answer to every riddle is completely fucking random, and there was no explanation that the audience would know how these clues like work out or like understand. It's kind of, like I was joking about before, like it's kind of like, oh, like Holiday, like he really liked Thai food, so we gotta go to this really hot place. Like it was just kind of like, whoa, like where did that fucking come from? Like it was just kind of like Percival explaining it to us as it happened. And I think that's like what made it like a bad movie.
I don't want to lose the whole thing I wanted to get to with the Shining thing.
Go for it,
It's like an even grosser example of like punishing people who don't get references, where like in that scene, like literally like they go to the Shining thing and they make a whole big deal about how like H hasn't seen The Shining, and
You're
like
right.
H as a character like gets like into these like precarious situations and almost like zeroes out and loses all of her coins because she hasn't seen The Shining, so she doesn't know that like the twins are bad and you have to stay away from the twins, or that the lady in the bathtub's going to turn into a ghoul, or that like when you walk out, like there's some stuff that doesn't even make sense within the logic of the movie of like, oh, when you walk out that door you're going to be in the like snowy maze scene at the end. Like even if you saw The Shining, you wouldn't know that that's what's going to happen, like in this weird like, which doesn't even make God, there's so much about this movie that I hate, but like if it was the Oasis and they were like acting out like The Shining, like either it should be chronological, like through the Shining movie, or it should be geographical, where it's like it's the whole Overlook Hotel and you can walk in, there could be something that's happening from that scene there, or you would have to actually walk out to the maze rather than you walk out the door of 437 and you're in like the maze. Like how does that work when it's like a whole like sandbox arena? Like if I'm in GTA and I walk out the building, I'm on the street where I should be. I'm not like in some other like fantasy reality or something there, like it just makes sense there. Anyway, that's a sidetrack, but that character gets punished for not knowing The Shining and getting the reference of The Shining. And then like even in that scene, they hit it on the nose and they say it out loud, where Parzival's character is like, yeah, I'm pissed you haven't seen The Shining, H, and like shames her for not seeing a movie that came out in what, like the 80s or late 80s, early 80s? Yeah, like it's just it's such a gross like theme to this movie of like, if you don't get all the Easter eggs in this movie, you're a fucking loser and you're hurting this team.
Yeah, no, it's super gross. I don't know. There's even just like this weird thing with women in this movie where even beyond the character of Artemis, like his aunt dies and he's like, you murdered my mother's sister. Like, she doesn't even have a fucking name.
She does, but he doesn't say it in that line yet.
It was just such a fucking stupid, fucking gross, like that's your
they don't even really go into like any grief or sorrow from that
honestly, she dies and the next scene he has zero remorse. He's just kind of like, gotta continue the mission, like, like
gotta keep playing video games.
I just want to play video games
all the time and every day.
I mean, I already talked about this, but like the technology is so confusing. He has like this omnipresent treadmill, which like
directional treadmill, yeah,
right, which wouldn't make sense with like any of the like jumping or leaping he does in this game, or anybody does in this game.
Or like, how does that work when you like sit down in the car? Like,
right, yeah.
Are you just hunched over like that, like killing your leg muscles, or do you have to actually sit down?
And then like closer to the end of the movie, they're all like strapped into these harnesses, which makes a little more sense, but it's just kind of like where were these harnesses earlier in this movie? And then like also near the end of this movie, like people are like VR fighting like Pokemon Go style in the streets, and they're just kind of like "Ah! Ah! Ah! Ah!" And then also the boss, like we were saying, is just sitting in a fucking circle chair, like
how does it? Yeah, how does he jump in? Or how does he even walk in that? Like, does he have controllers that he's playing with, and he's just looking through a VR thing? Like,
it's sad how poorly realized this movie is. It's kind of like, I love Steven Spielberg, and he's directed some of my favorite movies of all time. And I think it's just really sad how, I don't know, how poorly realized this movie is. It makes me physically sad. It's just kind of like, he's a director that I've kind of always looked up to, and it just sucks that he makes movies like this now, where like he made Jaws, and that's what made, like, that's one of those movies that really made me
I'd rather
love.
he be History Dad and put out another Bridge of Spies or The Post than do movies like this. Like, as much as when I watch those movies, part of me is like, I miss movie magic, Steven Spielberg. I don't miss Steven Spielberg who comes in for 3 hours, 3 days a week to be like, okay, that looks good. Like, make the Iron Giant go a little left there.
Right.
Like,
And I mean, have we talked about that? Where like, like I literally think I said, I mean, have we actually talked about that?
I don't think we did this episode.
Where like,
or this take of this episode.
Right, where like Steven Spielberg really only came in to deal with what's it called? Industrial Light and Magic, to oversee the film's visual effects, meening with ILM for 3 hours, 3 times a week. He stated that, and it's just kind of like, is that it? Like, you just kind of like come to show up, and like other people are doing the movie for you, and I don't know. It's just, I mean, Red Letter Media was kind of even just goofing about that, where it's kind of like, oh, like this is like a really like easy movie for Steven Spielberg to direct. Like, he just kind of has to show up and be like, yeah, I don't know, looks good. It's just kind of like he's not, I don't know. It feels just like less of a movie.
Like, there's stuff in the live action that feels like, oh, like I can see Steven Spielberg like imagining that and working that out. Whereas like in it, when he's like climbing down the stacks, and we're like seeing like, oh, here's this woman like being like a stripper in the Oasis, and here's this guy like skydiving, or here's this guy doing whatever, and we're kind of like world building a little bit wordlessly through that scene. That feels very Steven Spielberg. That feels very grounded in like actual filmmaking. But I really can't imagine Steven Spielberg being like, oh, and then like the DeLorean should like drive this way to get through here, and then like we're gonna like whip pan over here to some crazy reference to a video game I've never fucking played before. Like, I have to imagine that so much of it was like ILM being like, all right, let's animate this thing, and we'll just take direction wherever Steven Spielberg gives it, and we'll make modifications based on that. But like, how much of it is like Steven Spielberg being like, I have this vision for this exact path that this DeLorean's going to travel. Like,
right.
I just have to imagine that so much of it was in the hands of the animators for this movie.
Here's the thing where I say, I've never seen the BFG, but I believe that Steven Spielberg had more input of how the BFG looked.
I'm sure, yeah.
Where
it wasn't chaos,
right,
unfolding on screen.
Where I believe that maybe I said this to our friends, where I believe this is maybe the worst directed Spielberg movie that's ever existed. Again, just
maybe because of the technology of it. I don't know. It's just like I haven't seen
The only reason
every
I
single.
can't definitively say that is because I haven't seen what was the comedy he did.
I don't know.
It was like 1940. It was like A Year was the name of the comedy. I thought. I'll look it up. Well, but that's like one of his like worst reviewed movies.
1941.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen every Spielberg film, but honestly, without even seeing the BFG, and it looked fucking terrible, and that's one of my favorite childhood stories, and I'm sure he fucked it real good. Like that, I just can't imagine that being worse directed than this. Like, it was just kind of like, I picture 70-year-old Steven Spielberg directing The Post and like really putting some fucking effort into this old man history dad premise, and then him also directing Ready Player One and just being like, I don't fucking know, just kind of like.
It now makes a lot of sense how he was able to make both movies in the same year.
You're right. Yeah. No. Exactly. In how bad this movie was. Yeah.
Something I don't want to lose that we had started to discuss and we haven't gotten to in this take of this episode is the like poor understanding of like avatars, and like we sort of touched on that, but we didn't really touch on like how bad looking and just like hard to look at and just poorly designed the avatars are for Parzival and Artemis in this. I don't mind so much the H avatar for some reason, just because it's sort of
right.
There's something built into it where it's like she is a she, but in the Oasis she gets to live out this side of herself that like wants to be this more manly, assertive, dominant, huge, like not even like a human, like another worldly like creature that's kind of like an orc-ish like just expression of like testosterone and masculinity, and like can sort of live that out through the Oasis, and like that's sort of a nice sort of theme there. But the other two characters are like it's not as obvious like why they would pick that kind of avatar, and like again it's another example of like Steven Spielberg or Zach Penn or Ernest Cline like not really understanding like the creation of avatars, like which is a sort of relatively new thing for video games, and if you're someone who's got a lot of like 80s references in your book, maybe you don't understand that like like when you create a sim, you either create like yourself or you create your crush, or you just create a really wacky character for no reason. And like the avatars that the two main characters have are like sort of close to how they look, but it's not like real enough to be like, oh, this is like my self projection. This is how I like actually picture myself in my head. I just can't realize it in the real world because of whatever physical limitations. But it's not like wacky enough to be like, oh yeah, I just like threw some stuff together and this is like the avatar I'm stuck with. It's just like this weird like Percival is like this like white-haired anime white boy who's wearing like what is the fucking like, I feel like the vest he's wearing is a reference to something that I didn't catch.
I don't know.
It's got like a gold like sword thing. It might be a Final Fantasy thing that I'm not understanding, and maybe that makes more sense to other people. But again, that's an example of this movie sort of like persecuting people who don't understand like the Easter eggs in this movie. But then he's got like blue like sort of like skin tattoo glowing things going on, and then like the Artemis character's got like red pinkish skin, and like we talked about in the first take of this, where she's got like divorced like mom hair, where it's like this short like spiky slicked back sort of haircut that just screams like, let me talk to your manager, and I'm not over my divorced husband Mark yet. Like,
I mean, I don't even know if I already explained in like this round of the episode this film had nothing to say about how we use avatars any message that they have about technology was already just fucking incredibly simplistic and moralizing. I feel like I've already said that. I mean, I think in a previous episode that I was talking about how the avatars look like characters from Reboot.
Yeah,
Which, you haven't seen it, but does anybody remember that show? It was on Cartoon Network in the mid-90s, and it was a CGI animated show syndicated by a Canadian TV channel. I think it was literally the first, like, CGI kind of show on television. Even the premise was similar. They had these CGI people that lived inside of a computer that fought viruses. I don't know.
Why does it sound like what was the other kids? Remember the one I'm talking about from like the early 90s? It was on the same time as like Power Rangers. I can never remember the name of it every time I think about it. It had like a like main. It wasn't like a robot, but it was. I think it was like a suit that they went inside or something in like the digital, like they fought off viruses in the digital world, and it sort of looked like Megazord, but like a little slimmer. Is that ringing a bell for you at all?
Not at all.
Oh God, this is gonna bug it. Like every few years, I think about this show because I used to watch it all the time at the exact same time as Power Rangers. You would watch Power Rangers, then you would watch. It was like a long name too. It was. If you know what I'm talking about in the comments, please leave it because I don't even know what to search for when I look for it.
No, but I found
they had like action figures. I had like the toy. It looked like Megazord, but it was just like it was the iconic thing from that, and they fought off like viruses in the digital realm, and everything was like they're high schoolers, but then they go online into the digital realm and like fight like evil people there. It was very weird.
I don't know. I don't know, but this Reboot thing, I was looking up on Wikipedia, and I had no idea, but it had a pretty significant cult following. It had like 4 seasons. It had a video game. They planned to make a spin-off series that fell through, but they planned to make a in addition to that, they also plan to make a film trilogy that fell through. Again, this is a quote from Wikipedia of the most recent development that a reimagined live-action CG animated series reboot, The Guardian Code, was announced in 2015 and premiered on Netflix worldwide, excluding Canada, on March 30th, 2018. That YTV will later broadcast the series sometime in June 2018. In the original episode, I realized that this series had already came out and that maybe I should have looked that up, but I haven't. So if anybody wants to look that up, yeah.
What?
I don't know. How's that beer, Mike?
It's good.
It tastes good for me too.
Okay, good.
Guys, it's been a long night of this fucking episode not recording. Guys,
I don't know how to. This is a hard movie for me to review because there's so much that's wrong with this movie.
I watched this movie just in pure disappointment. I was just like...
Oh, I haven't even gotten to... like my main disappointment with this is... I think I talked about this in one of the next week's episodes. But I saw this movie in 3D at like the Cinemax XD 3D like theater, which is like their like big premium theater. Like they've got like leather like recliners, even though it's like a huge auditorium. So it's like a huge... expansive space, and it's supposed to be like a brighter 3D, but it's still the real D 3D, which I think sucks compared to IMAX 3D. But I really wasn't too impressed with, I mean, A, the Cinemax XD 3D, but B, just the visuals in this movie, where like I like could have seen this for free quote unquote with Movie Pass, like I do with most movies. But I was like, this seems like it's a visually involved enough movie that like, it seems like a headache to watch this just in standard digital. So let me just see it in like 3D, like not IMAX, but close enough to IMAX, because it seems like maybe where it's meant to be watched. And I was just so underwhelmed by like seeing it there. Like there's nothing really about the visuals that like really took me away. Whereas like usually, like I even remember watching like Avatar in 3D when I saw it, and I fucking hated Avatar. Right. But I still came out of that theater being like, God damn, 3D is really cool. I should see more movies in 3D. But like this, just like, I don't think it was filmed. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I don't think it was. This is just me basing it on what I saw. It didn't seem like it was filmed for 3D. It seemed like it was filmed and then converted to be in 3D, but like someone who wasn't patient enough to be like, here's the foreground layer, here's the background layer. Like I said, I watched the Avengers Infinity War trailer in 3D before this. It was the only 3D trailer before Ready Player One at this time. And it looked amazing compared to Ready Player One. Like, there's just so much depth to that. And it was clearly filmed by people who were like, oh yeah, this is going to be in 3D at some point. And people are going to, want to watch it in these premium formats. And this just didn't feel like something that was made for those premium formats, which is sad because it seems like something that would be such a headache in the digital, just standard format. Like,
oh yeah.
I don't know. It was just, I was very underwhelmed by it visually and physically. But there is some sort of like magic to it. Magic seems like a very strong word for it. I don't know what to call it, but it was just, there were parts that sort of, like I could kind of be like, okay, like I guess that's where Spielberg maybe comes in, where, maybe he didn't have his like, direction there, but just in his taste maybe for screenplays that he chooses to direct. There were parts of the climax of this movie that did sort of have a certain amount of, I don't even know if heart is the right word. Again, this is a really hard movie to describe because I hated it so much, but there were parts where I was like, I'm kind of invested in this. Right. And I've kind of like, there's part like, maybe if I would enjoy it more if I hadn't spent $14 on like the premium XD seat ticket for it. Yeah. Like maybe if this was something I just watched on like Netflix, just like on like a snow day or something where you're just killing time watching a bunch of movies. Like I might not hate to watch a movie like this, and I might be like, yeah, it was pretty good if you're watching it for free on Netflix. Yeah. So there is some merit to this movie. So I don't want to like completely trash it, but at the same time, there's a lot wrong with this movie, and it's pretty bad. I mean, so I don't know if that's going to come out into a number score when we actually get to ratings for this, but I just wanted to put that out there.
I mean, just like revisiting when I was talking about how like this film had nothing to say about like the way we use avatars or just any message, like just trying to have about technology. And how it was completely simple and just stupid.
No real character progression.
Yeah,
like, what does Ty learn about himself?
It really had nothing.
What does Ty gain besides money?
Yeah, no.
And I was like, is that really the point that Ready Player One is trying to get? Is that money solves everything?
No, exactly. It had nothing interesting to say about this, like, kind of like seemingly interestingly like rich visually world. It had nothing again, like in our episode that was not recorded, I was talking about how like it felt like it was written before the internet. Like it was kind of like almost this premise that was pure fantasy as opposed to something that could actually happen in the future. Like, like it lost all credibility. It just the way that it was filmed. Fucking another note that I had, Mark Rylance, arguably one of the worst casted just characters of all time. It just seemed like Mark Rylance was playing Garth from Wayne's World. It was fucking terrible. Like, I'm sorry. Like it's mostly I love Mark Rylance, but this was literally one of the worst roles, like worst like casted roles I've ever seen.
I won't disagree with that. I don't think he's absolutely awful in his own right. I just think that like I think the costuming was bad. Like they
most
picked something that
definitely,
didn't fit with him. He's a bad choice because you can't really make Mark Rylance look like a younger person.
Yeah.
Like he's always just going to look like 60-year-old, 70-year-old like Mark Rylance. But I don't know that I totally hate his performance in this. It's just it's very, I mean, like everything in this movie, it's underwritten. But like he does, I did believe like that he was a sort of like loner, like programmer, designer type guy. Like so it wasn't like a totally miscast part. I just think like maybe like you don't have to go as extreme with the hair for him. Like they somehow even like make like 70-year-old Halliday not look
I think
real, even though that's how old.
After Bridge of Spies, though,
Like just cut the hair. Like he doesn't need that. Like just let it have Mark Rylance hair, and we'll believe
after
it.
Bridge of Spies, though, I think Steven Spielberg said something like, "I don't ever want to like not cast Mark Rylance again," and I think that was like a weird fucking mistake because I don't know, like, is Mark Rylance going to be like the lead in his West Side Story? Like, Maria, I'm Mark Rylance. Like, it's weird and it's stupid. Like,
I feel pretty.
it's like he's a great actor, but like, stop, don't cast him in a stupid role like this fucking is, because this
It did feel beneath Mark Rylance.
This is a stupid
Oscar-winning
fucking
Mark
role.
Rylance.
Yeah, no, exactly. And how do you turn somebody down who's like, listen, I got you that Oscar. How about you play fucking Garth from Wayne's
Get
World?
over your fucking Mark Rylance. You owe me.
Yeah. It's real fucking stupid. It's just dumb. And I feel like even Mark Rylance has to be like, I didn't need to be in this movie, kind of. Again, it's like I was talking about before, where this movie's just, it's so poorly realized. I don't know. And it's kind of like, even like, if you look at like this movie and the Oasis, I didn't even really understand if like, did we stop creating things, or are we just like completely consuming like pop culture from the past? Like I didn't completely understand it. I don't know. And it's like something that we were talking about before, where I was kind of like Artemis, like she was like, oh, would you even like me in real life? And it's just like, when we get to her, like in real life, it's just like Olivia Cook, but just with like this weird
little birthmark.
Yeah, which is like
that
this
she can hide with
little,
her hair.
This little birthmark, and it's this big scene that's supposed to make Wade like appear deep. Like he's just kind of like, oh man, this really hot girl, she got like this tiny birthmark. Oh yeah, like, oh, I don't even see that. She like really hot. Like
He says something
so
really
dumb.
awkward in
Yeah.
that scene. It's like, I don't think it's meant to be awkward, but he delivers it so awkwardly. I'm trying to remember like exactly how he says it, where he's like,
But even
he's like, I'm not disappointed, by the way. Online, like you said, like I would be disappointed when I saw you, but like you're really hot.
But then he goes on with his friend where he's like, I've watched like all her Twitch streams, and like I've also
Does she not show her face in the Twitch stream?
Exactly. And it's so like weird and gross, like misunderstanding of like what culture is like today. And it's just, I don't know. This whole movie made me kind of gag. Yeah, but then at the end, the whole, I don't know. The whole like end kind of scene of this movie happens, and then it's kind of like the whole message of this movie kind of turns into like, oh, spend more time outside. Like it's a really like fucking Steven Spielberg dad kind of.
Even though the final key that they find, like the final message that Holiday was trying to send them was like, play older video games, essentially. Like, understand older references, you fucking youths.
Oh, spend more time outside. It's like, it felt really like Steven Spielberg, like, hey kids, stop looking at your phones and start looking outside, because there's nature out there and there's other people, and you might fall in love too. Like, it just felt like so gross and weird, and just like a really, like, I don't know. It was also kind of like when Wade gave that, like, speech before they, like, battled at the end, and it was just kind of like, oh, I didn't realize there's a fucking Oasis intercom that you could talk over, that you could, like, use to do your fucking vague speech at the, I don't know. I didn't like any of this movie, really. There was so much of this movie I did not enjoy. And
there were parts I enjoyed, but on the whole, very much disappointment.
Also, let's talk about, like, the end, where it's kind of like the bad guy has a gun and he's coming to fucking shoot Wade. And it's just kind of like he arrives there and he decides, like, not to shoot Wade.
I didn't get that part. I didn't get how, like, he got
Because
there
of,
and everyone
like,
stops him and is like, we know what you did here at the Stacks. But then he just keeps walking through, and, like, in this, like, poverty-ridden area of Columbus, Ohio, like, nobody else has an actual gun to be like, fuck you, you blew up, like, whatever. Like, they threaten him, but then he just keeps getting to walk through because he has a gun.
Right, yeah. And then he gets
And there wasn't any kind of, like, you know, ants, like, realization of, like, well, we're, you know, you're one guy with a gun, but we're like 100 of us here, and we could, like, crush you, you know, just through sheer, like, numbers. Like, you know, you can shoot one of us, you can't kill, like, all of us. Like, even that would be cheesy, but, like, the movie's not even willing to go to, like, those lengths. It's just
the movie's not even Sam Raimi's Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of like, hey, fuck you, like, Green Goblin. Like, yeah, you have advanced...
This is New York.
Yeah, you have advanced technology, but we're gonna throw a bunch of fucking beer cans at you, and, like, it doesn't matter because we're gonna stop you. It's kind of these lame fucking people who kind of, like, move out of the way, and I don't know.
I guess we gotta let him go kill Parzival.
Yeah, no, exactly. We see that he has a handgun, and we're gonna go let him kill, like, the leader of the free world. Like, it's kind of like, yeah, I don't know, like, he's got a gun. We better let him snipe fucking Martin Luther King.
There's so much with,
it's
like, the violence in this movie
gross,
with, like,
yeah.
Like, again, this movie does so much poor lack of, like, world building or exposition, but,
Right.
like, why is IOI allowed to have, like, an army? Like, from their, like, debt collection division, and, like,
I don't know.
if they're playing, like, second fiddle to the Oasis. What's the program, the company that runs Oasis?
I don't know.
Is it Halliday, or I can't remember.
But it's
The company that runs Oasis, like, if they're the more popular, more profitable version, then why don't they have their own fucking, like, army that's, like, doing shit?
Oh,
Like,
no,
what legal, like, hurdles, like, had to happen, or, like, what, like, fucking catastrophe had to happen in the real world that, like, we had to be like, oh, okay, like, corporations can hire armies with guns that are basically like SWAT teams that can, like, run through and, like, you know, fucking, like, capture your ass for not paying, like, for your fucking loot crates that you bought on the Oasis.
It was the most underwhelming scene.
It wanted to be like an
ever.
apocalyptic scenario, but it didn't want to do the homework or the research or, like, the ground building of, like, you know, I want to have this apocalyptic world where, like, you know, we have, like, these, you know, futuristic, like, cops that work for corporations running around, but I don't want to explain how that's possible.
Right.
At
Exactly.
all.
Yeah. Where it's just kind of like the CEO of a company grabs a fucking handgun and goes down to, like, the ghetto of, like, a city, and then goes into, like, and then, like, fucking forces his way through, like, a crowd, and then goes into a trailer where the person he wants to fucking murder, and then he sees, like, oh wow, he's holding the Easter egg, and it's just pure
It makes no sense because the whole point was supposed to be he didn't understand what was great about the Oasis.
Yeah.
He just saw dollar signs in his eyes. And like, if we're supposed to believe that he was so driven by greed that he was willing to fucking murder someone and walk through public with a handgun because he's so driven by this like lustful greed of like, I need to run the number one company. It's not good enough that I run a company that's so rich that we can like exploit cheap labor through like debt consolidation, and we can hire these fucking like SWAT teams that can like, you know, overthrow like a government. They're so like powerfully armed, and like we can pay people. I can offer like $1 million like contract to someone just to give me like information. Like, clearly that company's doing so well, but he's so driven by greed that he has to be the number one company. But then he's gonna walk up on that like trailer and just be like, oh, it's the Easter egg.
Oh,
his whole point was he didn't fucking care about the Oasis, and they didn't want him to run the Oasis because he didn't care. So, like, what is that even doing for him as a character?
It was just like he doesn't even see what the Easter egg looks like. He just like, it's so fucking stupid. I don't care if he was an intern for Holiday and Holiday didn't care about him. Like, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's just like, even after that in the movie, nothing makes sense at all. Like, the logic of Simon Pegg's character is fucking insane. Like, oh, he's been spending the last decade being this like
curator,
like NPC in the museum. Like, what the fuck would somebody do that? That's fucking literally mentally insane. Like, that's stupid. And then also he goes on to say like, oh, the true Easter egg is friendship. What? What the fuck? We know nothing about these people's like Simon Pegg and Holiday's relationship. It seems like it was like really fucking shitty because Simon Pegg married Holiday's like love of his life. And
it reminded me of like,
all you wanted to do is like be his friend. Like that, like, fuck you. You should be in like screenwriting fucking jail because none of this makes sense.
It reminded me of the first episode of this season, the most recent season of Black Mirror, where it was like the two sort of like not even really friends, but just two people that created a business together.
Yes.
And like the one is like the brains of the company and the other one's like the business side, where like Simon Pegg's Morrow is sort of like the business side, whereas like Halliday is sort of like the like what's the word, like he's got like these like ideals for like how like this game should be, and he wants to like, you know, ride off that the entire time rather than creating something that's going to make money. It's about something that's like bigger than money for him. Whereas like Morrow is the guy that's like, well, you know, we still need to sell, you know, units of this game or whatnot. It reminded me a lot of that first episode of like Black Mirror, but like they aren't friends in that relationship either in the Black Mirror one. So yeah,
but it makes less sense because there's a partnership. There's a partnership that he cuts him out of, and then there's a third person who doesn't even like you know, like this feels very art versus commercial. Like, oh, I want to like monetize the Oasis. But this person who wants to monetize the Oasis isn't even a part of the Oasis. He's like this weird intern who becomes a CEO.
Them trying to make Ben Mendelsohn look young too was really funny.
Yeah,
there's parts of this where
so
like
weird. Yeah,
like I thought this stuff with Simon Pegg, like maybe that's just me not realizing how old Simon Pegg is getting. But I thought like they were able to make Simon Pegg look pretty ageless in this, where like when they wanted young Simon Pegg, he was unrecognizable. When they wanted old Simon Pegg, he was unrecognizable. But they couldn't do that with like Mark Rylance and Ben Mendelsohn because they're actually old people who can't be like made young unless you're really gonna dive deep on like the CGI on the face.
I don't know. It was fucking.
Ben Mendelsohn's teeth were fucking weird in this too. That was just like I guess that's supposed to be, like, but that's something that they could have like that could have been a theme where like his Oasis character had perfect teeth and like I don't know if that was something that Ben Mendelsohn actually did in real life, like getting I don't think so. They were so pristinely white and clean that I have to imagine it was like, whatchamacallit, mouthpieces that he was wearing.
Right.
But it affected like the way he talked too. He didn't totally sound like Ben Mendelsohn anymore because he was talking around these like teeth. Just such a weird costuming choice to be like, we need to fix Ben Mendelsohn's teeth. Like, when have we ever looked at Ben Mendelsohn's teeth and be like, ugh? Like, he's been fine in every other role he's been in.
Yeah.
If they were fine for the Star Wars universe, they're fine for this.
I don't know. It was just weird. I mean, again, like I said, I don't know if I said it in this take of this episode, but it's fucking terrible world building. This whole movie. This movie on a meta level tries to reconcile like our addiction to like pop culture. I don't know. This movie is crafted based on the rights of like what they could get. It's a weird movie. It's a weird fucking movie.
I really wish I could.
There's a lot of references. I'm sorry. I have so many random thoughts coming through my head at once. But like this movie, there's a lot of references, but none of them are really substantive. Like look, Batman is rock climbing, but like none of those really had any impact on this movie.
There's also just like an overload of references, like especially in that final
definitely.
battle,
There's
like when
a
they
lot,
show all
yeah.
the characters running, and I was like, I didn't even have time to look at who all was there. Like, not that I needed to see every single one, but like I only saw like one or two. Like I was like, oh, that's one of the Battletoads characters, and then I saw someone else, and there's just too much to look at. Like, it was just sensory overload, this like whole movie. Like, even when they would like put them in areas in the Oasis, they would like just over animate the shit out of everything, where it would just be like too many colors, too much whatever. Like, nothing actually looked beautiful because it was just too much of everything. There's no like subtlety or like quiet or calm to this movie, like at any point,
Oh, right. Yeah. I don't know. And it was just, I was seeing like a lot of like tweets about Ready Player One, where it's just kind of like Ready Player One's villain is like this corporate bigwig who exploits like fan culture for profit. And like, it just felt like that was such an...
That's what Ready Player One.
Yes, there's just an overwhelming amount of irony in kind of, I don't know.
I wish I could better describe what I liked about this movie, because I feel like when we get into my ratings, mine is not going to make sense based on how much I'm riffing this movie. But there is something to it, like where like I can sort of understand like at least what people are liking about it. I just can't understand why they're not seeing what I so immensely hated about this movie. But like it's not like a 0 or even like a half finger movie for me.
Right.
I mean, we can even just jump right into
let's do it.
The reviews right now. Let me just real quickly read the Rotten Tomatoes. On review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 74% based on 310 reviews. It's a lot of reviews. And an average rating of 6.9 out of 10. The website's critical consensus reads, Ready Player One is a sweetly nostalgic thrill ride that neatly encapsulates Spielberg's strengths while adding another solidly engrossing adventure to his filmography. Heavily disagree. So I'm going to give it 2 fingers. And that's what I'm sort of saying, where like that, I feel like we've riffed on this for so long that it feels like a much lower than 2 finger movie, but I have to trust my gut coming out of the theater where there was something there. There was something in that climax that, like, even if they weren't progressing these characters nearly as much as they should have been progressed, if the lead character was so underwhelming and disappointing, and a lot of aspects of just the Oasis in general just felt misguided, and the movie felt like sensory overload. There were some like aspects of good filmmaking, not great filmmaking, just in sort of the climax of this movie, or just certain elements, Like I thought like the race scene was like sort of a nicer blend of like not being too crazy overload on the Century stuff, where like I could follow what was going on and could enjoy what was happening on the screen. Whereas like the final battle was just kind of like, why am I even looking at the screen?
Lost me. Yeah.
I can't pay attention to what's going on. There's too much happening here. There's too many characters that I'm supposed to like. There's nowhere to focus your attention when there's that much happening. But the race is a little more singularly focused, and just like like the Shining house. Even though I thought it was a poor decision, like financially for this movie, like I don't think a lot of kids from the demographic that this movie really needs to aim for are going to get it. I did appreciate it as a 28-year-old male, sort of going into that universe again, and just sort of like the friendship aspect of like the climax, like on like a real base level, I sort of kind of liked. Like even like 2 feels like maybe I'm just not willing to be that harsh on a Steven Spielberg movie.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. It's even hard for me to justify to myself, but I have to just trust that like when I came out of the theater, I was disappointed, but I wasn't like, this is the worst movie I've ever seen. It was bad, and I felt bad that I spent $14 on it. So it's a below average movie for sure.
Right.
But I do have a hard time going lower than 2 based on my theater experience. So
yeah,
that's where I'm at.
I don't know. This is a hard movie for me.
Did you have any positive feelings about it?
No, yeah, I definitely had positive feelings about it. I think it definitely represented something. I mean, it tried to represent something, and I think it had this kind of false narrative of what was actually happening. I don't know. I mean, again, it felt like Steven Spielberg. I said this like right after I saw the movie. It felt like Steven Spielberg played like Halo 2 and was like, "Yeah, I understand internet gaming. I'm gonna direct Ready Player One right after this," and like read the 2011 novel, and then came into 2018 being like, "Hey guys, I got this movie for ya," and it was just so disconnected from what is happening now on a social level, which we went over. Like, again, if this came out like X amount of years before Gamergate, I'm sure this would have been much better. But again, this movie really highlighted the gatekeeping of gamers and just kind of like the nerd fandom of kind of like, hey, fake nerd girls, like you think like Zelda is the, like you think like Zelda
it feels
is
like it's made by someone who never read that. You remember the essay from Patton Oswalt?
Yeah.
It was like, remember when like being a nerd was like a bad thing and it wasn't the cool thing and it wasn't like easy to be a nerd.
It was, this movie's just so weird and outdated. And again, like I said, it feels like this fantasy before the internet was invented, which is so crazy, just even for the average viewer who has no idea of like what the like nerdum fan, like I don't get how people who even have an understanding, I don't understand how people of like modern, like the understanding of a modern like kind of like nerd like this movie. I don't know how this is a complete betrayal of that. I don't know. It's crazy. It feels like a crazy fucking movie, and it feels like a one finger for me. I wanted to give it a 1.5, but it's just so much more frustrating because it's like, ugh. I don't know. It just seems like what my dad thinks. Like my dad who understands the internet. Like it's what my dad thinks. Like what the like
when you say like it feels like Steven Spielberg played Halo 2 and wrote
right,
this.
yeah.
To me, it feels like Steven Spielberg watched his kids play Halo 2 and was like,
it's so
okay,
it's even worse. Yeah,
it's so weird because like so many of his other movies have been like, or at least recently, or within like the more this millennia have been like him bringing sort of a better understanding of things that like he gets as like history dad and we don't really
right
get as, like, the
yeah
general public.
exactly
Like, you know, like the Post, which the Post ends up being a four-finger movie for us because it's shedding light on this situation that like we in this generation, because of our age, know fucking nothing about. And like it's cool to know that stuff about, you know, the Post in its early days and the Pentagon Papers, what they actually were, and the way, you know, the printing presses and everything worked back then. There's a lot that we like learn from watching a movie like that. Same with something like Saving Private Ryan, even though it's not as much of like a history lesson, like it teaches us about like, you know, the horrors of war, which like even if Steven Spielberg was never in war, it's something that he could find a way to like relate to and like bring to us. But like it felt like he wasn't willing to do like the emotional research of like, what is it like to be a kid playing video games online? And he just couldn't get it.
Right, yeah.
And like, you know, he can put out a movie like The Post. Like I remember us watching The Post and being like, this feels like Steven Spielberg's kind of losing it. But that's still a four-finger movie because A, he can make it with like the way that Steven Spielberg is comfortable making movies that feel right, while also bringing a certain amount of like, there's still emotional intelligence to The Post. And there's still like, you know, just actual intellectual intelligence to The Post. And like, you know, it's like a lesson in history, but it's also something that like is relevant to like the current times, whereas like this doesn't feel relevant to the current times. It feels like outdated and something that like was barely even relevant in like 2011 because half the references are too old for that at that point.
Yeah.
And it's like relevant to a time that never existed. Like, you know, like it's just someone who didn't understand what he was putting on the screen. And that's so weird for Steven Spielberg because
it is,
everything else that he puts on the screen feels so pointed and like purposeful, you know, like if you watch like the Spielberg documentary, it's really evident how like a lot of the things he chooses are like, even if though it's about this, it's really about this. And like, what is Ready Player One really about?
He doesn't,
and I know what he thinks it's really about based on like the message that comes through in the end. But that's not like a real depiction of anything. Like that's not a real way to look at the internet of like, oh, 2 days a week you should go outside.
Which is why I think I've never seen
it. Doesn't go into the nuances of like there's good
yeah.
in the internet and there's also bad in the internet, and it's up to you to sort of moderate like how much you can take and how much you shouldn't take.
Exactly.
Anyway. Obviously a 1 and a 2 that's going to come out to 1.5 fingers. So finally we disagree on the score. Although I guess next week we disagree, not to spoil it, but yeah, tune in for that next week. So yeah, we made it through our second review of Ready Player One in a single night.
We have, yeah.
Yeah, so tune in for A Quiet Place next week with Cam and Emily Marziani of the This Old Married Couple podcast. And tune in for Isle of Dogs the week after that with DJ Pete Granada.
That's correct.
Both good episodes. We've recorded them already, so I can verify that they're solid, good, funny episodes for sure. And anything else Joe will probably have covered in the intro to this podcast. So just check us out on howmanyfingerspodcast.com, and that's about all I got to say.
Yeah.
We're going to go to bed or watch a movie or something, but we're certainly not going to record any more episodes because this is our 4th episode, even though it's the 3rd episode we recorded tonight. I'm not even making sense at this point. So, that's that.
That's how it goes.
See you guys next week.
Later.
Good night.